Dr. Yeske, I know you talked about the fogging, using the fogger, so I was just curious if you could share a little bit of your success rate on using the foggers in gilts.
Yes, so far the success rate on the fogging has been very good. We're still in the early phases, really understanding everything we need to know, and there still needs to be some research done. So for those of you who have influence on the Swine Health Committee, some research dollars there would be very helpful. And but so far it's been very good, extremely good. Like when we've done the fogging technique, we haven't had very many failures there so far. And it appears that that's a much better way than trying to do any sort of animal-to-animal, contact animals or cedar animal type models. It takes more time. And I think one of the early assumptions was that all the animals are infected, and it's just not true, unfortunately, with myco. And I think that's one of the reasons we've had trouble over the course of time, is that not all the animals get infected, and some of them may be parity 2, parity 3 before they ever become infected. And I don't think we understood that maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago, of just how slow the progression is through the herd and why those animals continue to be problems over time. But the fogging's been very good. Very good success rate. Again, make sure you work with your veterinarian. Don't just go out and start fogging. There's some bad things that can come along with it. We always look to make sure we're not infecting with PRRS or flu, and then we work to reduce some of the bacterial components. We treat the animals that we're using for donors. And so there's a little bit of a procedure with the fogging. It's not just grinding up the lungs and going. It's fairly simple, fairly inexpensive, which is good, but there is some quality control in the background to make sure that you've got a good plan on before you go to it.
Okay. Any questions? I'll keep asking if there are any questions.
Melissa, you guys have done a lot too with the fogging, right?
We have. So we've done pretty extensively, and we've toyed around. Like you said, there's some research that probably needs to happen with dosage, how you expose them, how many animals, how much fog do you need, and how long do you leave the ventilation off for. There's a very, very wide range of what we've used, and so far we haven't missed on any of them. They've all gone positive, but there's been a variation on whether it takes them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks to go positive 100%. So there's definitely some technique to it. And some things that we really don't know, but we've been very impressed with it. And from a labor standpoint, you can't beat it. I mean, it's all done in one day, and it's a much safer process. You ask anybody to go expose something intratracheal and do 1,300 animals in a day, and somebody's going to get hurt. So it is a very good process from a people standpoint as well. And like Dr. Yeske mentioned, I mean, we do extensive testing on the material before we use it so that we ensure we're not fogging something we don't intend to.
All right, you guys all talked, so I'll have each of you just kind of cover this. You all talked about the importance of time zero. So in other words, you're doing your exposure method, which sure appears that fogging has really been a nice option to do that. But then you all talked about we have to establish time zero. So what do you use? And I'm trying to think about the standpoint, which tests do you use? How many samples do you take? What is kind of your process to say, yep, I feel good that all the animals have been exposed? I'll start with you, Melissa.
So we start with a fairly low level a few weeks after a fogging event, in the vicinity of, call it 30 animals. Tracheal swabs, we really, the only time we use something else, we might use an oral fluids just to confirm, yep, they're positive, but if you're positive on oral fluids, you've got a problem. There's a lot of mycoplasma moving around. So we will generally start with a smaller sample of 30 animals and watch, and we'll continue to do just 30 animals every other week, every 2 weeks, until we start to see all those go positive, and then we'll up the game. Then we'll up it to 60 animals and ensure that they are all negative. So we'll do a span of weeks, every other week for 2 weeks, all tracheal samples. Again, it's very labor intense. We've got a handful of people in the system that are really good at doing them now. And it's all PCR. Pooling wise, we do pool them until we get towards the end, and then we'll start to make smaller pools of those so that we can ensure that we catch the positive. To date, it's been pretty impactful to see how long it takes them to go 100%. I mean, we're talking 4 to 7 weeks sometimes.
Okay, very good. How about you, Mark, and your guys' systematic eliminations? What kind of testing were you using to establish time zero?
So we've relied on serology because these gilts are non-vaccinated. And so then we have, I believe, a clear picture of positive status using serology. 8-10 years ago, we would be the old method of just natural exposure, and the project in 2017, I believe, originally started in 15, and we could not get this gilt barn to turn. It was finally, after I personally was involved in the process of trying to seed down the barn, and that didn't even work, went to the fogging method. So serology works in unvaccinated animals, and so 30 is a starting point, and until we can, in multiples of 30, to be close to 100% sure, never 100% unless we test that entire population. But I've become more diligent in the recent years than we were back in the original projects. We have to confirm that date.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things. If going back to when we started back in 2003, at that point in time we didn't understand that was even an important factor, and that's probably why some of those early projects failed. Is we just assumed the pigs were positive because we brought them into the farm and they got exposed and everybody's positive. And so I think whether we use serology, the tracheal swabs on those animals will probably give you a little faster answer than the serology. That's the advantage of the tracheal swabs. And then I like to go out and look in the breeding herd as well, just to see how much exposure is there. Do we need to go in and do a exposure of the breeding herd as well? Because some of these herds that are acute outbreak are relatively new outbreaks. You may not have exposure through the sow herd, or you may not have been doing a good job, especially if you're bringing in select weight gilts. You may not have gotten animals exposed, and you may have pockets of negative population in your herds that you weren't expecting.
Yep.
So that brings up another, right, we test our day zero on the gilt. On the sow herd side, we've started to space those testing out, right, and go into every single B&G barn and different corners and do the exact same thing to ensure or answer that question, do we need to expose the sow herd? And what is the sow herd status at? And it's been very interesting to see that there will definitely be pockets of negatives within those sow herds that we've missed, that we thought were good. They had to have all been positive. There's definitely pockets of negative out there much longer. The other thing to remember on day zero, the only way you're going to know 100% for sure is if you test every animal. We're never going to do that, right? So you're just trying to get close enough and confident enough, whether you do that with a number of weeks, number of samples, you've got to up that somehow, but you'll only ever get 100% sure if you test every animal, and nobody's probably going to do that.
So for the sows, are you doing that with serology, or are you doing tracheal swabs on those as well?
We're doing tracheal swabs on those as well.
Okay.
So that's where that PCAI rod comes in. On a sow, the only way you're going to get deep enough is if you have a really, really long swab. And those seem to get, we're getting more positives. I've been shocked at the amount of positives we've been able to find, even in herds that we thought were stable. You go in those sows and actually get deep enough in her, she'll be positive.
Yeah, it looks like the tracheal swab stays positive for a very long time in a positive herd.
Yeah.
When you do the closures, then they'll eventually go negative, but it takes the time to get them negative. But in the positive herds where there's active mycoplasma, it appears that they stay positive for a very long time.
Yep. So, Mark, you mentioned on your Mycoplasma negative flows that you've stopped vaccinating them, and based on the data that Dr. Yeske shared, saying there's a low probability of lateral infection. Just curious, have you had a group break on Grow Finish? And if you did, what were the impacts?
I believe I can recount 2 or 3 sites that of negative flows that we'd find positive, and both of those would be based on the clinical signs, probably exposed later in the finishing. So the time we started to see it, we were marketing or close to market, so fairly minimal. Again, you look at the odds of it happening early in that finishing phase, and you take those two together and you say, well, if they are exposed at halfway through finishing in a small number of animals, just by the nature of that bug,
Right.
it's fairly insignificant.
Okay.
Much
So-
more pronounced on a break of a sow farm of a high load coming off that farm with the wean pigs.
Yep. Okay. All right.
And we've continued to vaccinate ours with the thought process that a fair number of ours would go into very, very pig-dense areas, and we place a fair number of PRRS-positive pigs. So if you take PRRS and flu and put
Yep.
them together with Mycoplasma, the impact is now much, much higher. So we've continued to vaccinate those. However, we've got some unvaccinated that we would leave in regions or areas where the risk is low.
Low.
And we have had 0 lateral breaks to date that we know of. Anything we found came off the sow farm.
Very good. So you have to tell what's with the box, Jamie?
So it is a tossable, throwable microphone, and it is soft. I promise it will not hurt you. It does say on the bottom, please do not throw at people's heads. But so, anybody have a question?
I thought maybe there was a prize in there.
It is not. No.
If you ask a question, you get to throw the microphone.
Exactly. That is the prize. Yes.
That's the prize.
All right. Last chance for questions from the audience here. If you don't have any, let's give our panel discussion a round of applause and thank you.